every now and then you get a fault that perplexes you and you don't understand how it can happen. Well, this video is going to be about that. I'm driving at the moment, I can't look at the screen, I've got it on my cradle mount there. And this is about timing. It's an N43. We all know timing chains go wrong on these. We all know that the stretch and the timing goes out and you get a camshaft crankshaft correlation. Fault code. Well, guess what? On this particular job, I did have that code. It wasn't the timing chain. It wasn't even the Vanos wheels. Now it runs perfectly. There's no engine light. We're going to go back now. We're going to look and see if the engine light, although it's not on, if there's any fault codes. If there's no fault codes, I'll crack on and I'll tell you exactly what it was. And it all involves a camshaft position sensor. And that's it. So keep tuned and you're going to learn something. So after that quick roll test, I'll explain what the situation is. So it came from another garage and they basically said it needed a timing chain. So obviously I did my homework and I had a quick look. I haven't took the cam cover off, but what I did do was scope it. I always scope them because I can tell if the crankshaft reference point is here, if it's left or if it's to the right of that mark. I know if the chain is stretched or not. However, this was a bit weird. So on the screen now, you'll see the fault codes. My young friend Eric diagnosed it. It was on the exhaust bank at first. Then after that, he changed the sensor and put it in the intake bank. Now, your big clue there is that fault code there. And then the other clue is that when we switched it, the fault transferred to the intake side. So basically there was no faults. When you take the old intake sensor and throw it on the exhaust, there's no faults. So clearly it looks like there's a sensor issue, doesn't it? So what I did, before I put the scope trace on in a minute for you, is took the sensor out. Obviously the job's done now and the car's gone and it's all fixed. I did like 40-kilometer road test. This is the sensor. So what I did, I measured it. First of all, I looked at the actual flatness of it because the flatness is quite important. You might not think so. It's magnetic. So actually, I looked at that. You can't see it there. It's not really possible kind of to see on camera. I don't think it will be anyway. But I can promise you it's rocking about. It's not flat at all. Then, because we work at a BMW specialist, we always have parts in. I got a brand new one out the parts department. And then I did the same test. Absolutely spot on flat with no rocking at all. So basically, it's concaved and it's like domed. That'll affect your gap, won't it? Then, what I did is I took the old vernier, digital vernier, and I measured them. I measured the old one first. Not really accurate, but it's kind of accurate. It's more or less the same sensor. Of course, even if it's non-genuine, it should be the same air gap, right? It's got to be the same size, otherwise. Externally, it could be longer, but it isn't. It looks the same. And I measured 49.2 millimeters on the old one. Then I got the new one, which is basically the same manufacturer. I measured 48.5. So there's a big difference there in the air gap. Now, I've explained to you why that would absolutely affect the signal. Now, I couldn't see so much on the signal, but when I changed the sensor, bizarrely enough now, I don't know if it's coincidence, it moved a bit away from the crankshaft at TDC Max, several teeth. And what I did before I did that, I pulled the Vanos solenoids out and it didn't do anything. Nothing happened with anything, apart from the exhaust side. Intake side didn't do a damn thing. So, I'll just run over to my drawer now and I'll show you something. Why this air gap is so important. 1 second. So, this is actually off an N20, so it's not really the same one, but it doesn't matter, it's okay. So imagine that is a camshaft phase wheel. Well, the sensor's going to be bolted in, and if your sensor's bolted there and that's spinning round, it's going to detect where the camshaft is because it's going to use this Hall sensor effect on these gaps. Not so easy on front camera. Basically, imagine if your air gap is much more reduced. I mean, that's no air gap. And then that's kind of probably the air gap should be. So it's going to affect your signal. That is what that fault code means. So let's take a look at the scope trace and I'll show you how you can scope it basically. And now we can see what an N43 good scope trace looks like because basically it's got 2 good sensors in and everything's working. No chain stretch. And they wanted to charge several €1,000 to do the chain on that. But I know that the chain was probably done some time back because it was bang on, it was, you know, silver, no problem with it. Again, yes, it's common, N43 chain problems. sensors, not so common, but we saw on the fault codes, didn't we? Here's the, by the way, the fault codes after the sensor was changed, when my young mate swapped them round. So the old sensor was on the exhaust sensor was swapped to the intake, and then the old intake was swapped to the exhaust. Well, not wrong with the old intake sensor, but our faults went to exhaust. So that's that one there. You can see those fault codes are more or less the same. And it mentions camshaft, crankshaft correlation. It's not so good really, is it? Now, I didn't really see how a sensor could change the signal. Maybe it did. Don't think it's possible really, is it? How's it possible? It's possible, I suppose, but really I think it just throws a fault. When it gets hot, I think what happens is this knackered sensor, it's swelling, and it's, obviously I'm exaggerating it, but it's swelling up and it's closing that air gap, and at some point it's going to do something weird. Check these scope traces out, you'll like them. So this is the old sensor, the intake camshaft position sensor, and that's the blue line you can see, and the leading edge of it is just lining up with TDC on the crankshaft. That space you can see there, which I've just highlighted, that's the TDC mark for the crankshaft position sensor, and that is the state of play with that sensor in. No matter what I did with the Vanos, by disconnecting the Vanos or anything like that, that never moved really, and I would imagine it should do really, because if it's in closed loop, the engine, then Vanos should be at least working slightly on, at least on idle anyway. Not so much, of course, until you rev it, but still, it should do something different than when the Vanos solenoid is plugged in, as opposed to when it's not plugged in. And I know that because I've checked that on other engines. So that's the first thing. So we'll take a look now at our other scope trace, which is when we put the new sensor in. All I did at the same temperature, it took about 15 seconds to unbolt the sensor and put the other one in, and it instantly changed the timing. So check this out, you'll like it. Well, there you are. That's the new sensor installed, and we're going to basically zoom in now and have a look at that. And you can see that the phasing starts just kind of a little bit before the TDC mark of the crankshaft. And obviously you've got two vertical blue lines there, and I've zoomed in a bit much there, but basically that's just one square segment, and that obviously represents one of the gaps on the phase wheel of the camshaft, what I showed you earlier. It's a bit different on the N43, but similar to the N20 that I've shown you. Phase wheel, and that essentially I can only explain it as it's either shifted or the signal was just kind of shrunk or reduced because there was a fault with the sensor. What I want you to take away from this video is that essentially, if you've got these issues, don't just think it could be Vanos solenoids or Vanos wheel or a timing chain stretch. Just do something simple first and swap the sensor from sort of the exhaust bank to the intake bank, because you never know, it could actually, like in this case, fix your problem. So we got lucky with that one. And if you like that video and you've not subscribed, think about subscribing, because there's quite a lot of good videos coming up over this year and next year. And then also press notifications if you would.